Hello, supporters and fans of Martin Barna podcast. Today I have a very special guest. I'm very honored to be able to present you Mr. Stuart Phillips. Dr. Stuart Phillips, whose expertise is on protein, if I'm not mistaken, skeletal muscle, and of course lifting, protein, aging, supplements, exercise, and much, much more. Mr. Phillips, welcome and thank you very much.
It's my pleasure, Martin. Thanks for having me on the show. Great to be here.
Mr. Phillips, a question which I think came to the mind of anyone who listens to you. How did you start your journey as a scientist? What led you to this profession?
So it's interesting. I was an athlete. I played all kinds of sports growing up, and so was always intrigued with sports, but really enjoyed science. And when I went to university, I had a choice. The program that I teach in now is kinesiology, sports science, if you like. When I went to university, I went to McMaster actually to do my undergrad. It was physical education, so it was more geared towards teaching. And so I actually took biochemistry as my undergraduate. And in the last year of my degree, I thought I was going to go and do medicine, become a physician. Mm-hmm. And I broke my leg playing rugby. And so I couldn't play. I had a lot of time. And so I decided to do a thesis project. And I went into the lab, and I guess you could say I've never left. It's I enjoy learning. I enjoy discovering new things, and research for me has been a real passion. And so it was a bad event, I thought at the time, but it changed the direction of my life. And really, I think you can say from there, I never really looked back.
I can see that because I follow you on Facebook and Instagram, and I see your passion every day here, and I really love this. Thank you for choosing this profession, because I think it is very helpful for many people on Earth. Okay, can we go to the specific topics on research?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. First thing, genetics and strength and muscle gains and muscle mass. What do we know? And there are some interesting findings in last months, if I'm not mistaken, I saw on your Facebook.
Yeah, so I think it's hard to, if you like, outpace your genetics. Mm-hmm. And so I always say to people, you got to pick your mom and your dad wisely, right? So it's kind of a joke, of course, because, but if I always suspect that, two parents, if they're both good athletes, are probably a little bit more likely to have children that will be good athletes. You often find sporting families, some so-and-so was a good athlete, so the next generation is a good athlete, and so on and so forth. I do think your genetics are sort of the basis, but that's not to say that they really confine things too much. They're somewhat of a keyboard, and you can play the keyboard in different fashions, and you can always create good music, so to speak. And that's the training and the exposure to the right life experiences, the right nutrition, everything else. But I do think that there are some things that are difficult to change too much unless you have the right genetic makeup. And that may be the physiology of gaining muscle or the physiology of becoming fit, for example. But you can still push yourself to where your ceiling, your top level is. It might not just be as high as some of the better people in the field, unfortunately.
So even if I'm not, let's say, genetically gifted on bodybuilding side, I can still be a good bodybuilder, but I will never be on Olympia, let's say.
Yeah, and I think that's the sort of, we like to say, if you broke people into quartiles, so we said this is the bottom, there's a second quartile, third quartile, and the top quartile. If you're in the bottom, I think you could move to the third. You can maybe move even to the second with some hard work. If you're in the second, I think you could get, you could ever find your way to the first quartile. So there's some limits, but you can always improve.
That's perfect. Is there some new research on this topic? Because it sounds similar for me, and I thought that there was some kind of new research you shared on Facebook, I think.
Yeah, we have a collaborative study with Mike Roberts at Auburn University. I can say now, because the paper's been accepted to FASEB Journal.
Perfect.
That you should watch out for that. It's Mike's paper, so I don't want to steal his thunder. But it's an interesting genetic variant, actually in not even an exon, so not a gene that is transcribed, but an intron that is part of the gene in a specific locus that predicts your trainability, or it does a decent job of trainability. So, but like a lot of these things, there are probably thousands of these genetic variants that play a role in determining very complex genetic traits like muscle gain, VO2 max. Simple traits, eye color, height, everything, that's easy. But complex traits are much more difficult.
When do the research comes out? Do you know the date?
It should be within the next month.
Perfect. So, okay. So until the end of April, because I will send this out later. Okay, sure. So our favorite topic, plant versus animal protein and muscle protein synthesis. I think you have some very exciting news for us.
Yeah, you know, so I think that the history of the work that I've done in protein metabolism has really been underpinned and strongly driven by animal protein research. And that's mainly because, you know, without, you know, painting too much of a face on it, it's been sponsored by dairy, beef, eggs, etc. So the commodity boards that commonly produce protein containing foods. And that's not to say that, you know, plant proteins, soy being one of the bigger ones, can't do the same job. The true heart of the matter is that animal proteins tend to be a little bit higher quality than plant proteins. That's biology, that's fact, you can't change it. But you can make up for that difference by simply increasing your consumption of plant protein to a higher level. And once you get to a certain level, about 1.6 grams of protein per kilo of body weight, it doesn't matter whether you're consuming plant protein or animal protein, because you're getting sufficient protein and all of the essential amino acids. And I think importantly, you're getting the essential amino acid leucine, which is what, that's the key amino acid that drives the growth of muscle tissue.
So this doesn't change. The leucine is still a very primary thing, but we just know that 1.6 grams per kilo without fat, right? Muscle mass.
Right. Yeah. So that's 1.6 grams per kilo of total per kilogram of body weight, not lean tissue. It's a little bit higher, obviously, when you express it for lean tissue, but we use body weight for the main reason is that most people don't know what their lean mass is. So we use per kilogram body weight. If we break that down into, say, a per meal recommendation, then it's between about 0.4 to 0.5 grams of protein per kilogram per meal. And you can consume that 3 or 4 times a day, and you get all the benefits that you need. So once you get to that intake, pretty much, and we use soy protein to get people in the vegetable or plant-derived protein group. So it was a high-quality protein to that intake. Then you're getting sufficient protein, sufficient essential amino acids, and sufficient leucine. And to your question, yeah, we don't, I'm not sure I really understand why it is that leucine is the key amino acid, but it's the one that, if you like, it's like turning on a light switch. So once you have leucine in there, it turns the process on and everything just goes from there. If you feed people protein that contains no leucine, you don't get any effect.
Sounds good. Look, so this could probably lead to lowering of meat consumption in future in fitness community, right?
Yeah.
Not that we have to do it. I think from the ethical reasons, like vegans, for example, want to see. I think it's good. I see just one problem here, because when I work with my clients, I'm online coach. Animal proteins are lower in calories, you know, per the protein load, let's say. So in plant-based sources of food, there is lots of calories with that proteins. So it is not much effective for the people. You know, it's hard for a vegan to hit the protein goal without some supplement, I think. Is it right?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you look at it from a protein to energy ratio, then you're right. You know, animal-based proteins have a much higher protein to energy ratio than do plant-based proteins. I think, to your point, when you move to isolated proteins from plants, so soy, pea, you know, quinoa protein, those proteins, then they begin to do the job. So if you're a true vegan, then I do think that it's beneficial to think about some isolated protein sources. But again, it doesn't have to be animal protein. It could come from plants. But to your point, it's difficult to eat enough plants to get to that level. So, but let's just say that the protein effect to add to muscle growth is still relatively small compared to the gains you get just going to the gym and lifting weights. So that's a good point. A small slice on top. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to work out. You just have to work out. You cannot just eat protein and gain muscle.
No.
I think that's a good point. But to be fair, truth is that the animal, I mean, plant sources of protein also has fiber mostly, which is also very beneficial. So I think it is a good thing that the research showed this. Okay. Next thing. I thank you for your work. Next question. Protein, carbs, and fats timing for building muscle according to science. Is there a difference if a goal is focused on strength or explosiveness or muscle hypertrophy? You know, are there some recommendations you think are relevant in this year from what we know until this time that would guarantee something like more beneficial effects on muscle gain or strength gain if you spread the carbs and fats timing somehow?
Yeah, so I think there was a lot of research done in the mid 80s and early 90s and into the timing of provision of carbohydrate. And that was aimed at trying to restore glycogen in muscle, which is, it's an important part if you're competing in high-end sprint type activity sports and, even for resistance exercise. The fat kind of got left alone a little bit, but then along come low carb, high fat diets, and fat becomes an important part of it. Protein was sort of always out there a little bit, and we're all getting enough, so it's not a big deal. And then now it's all, or a lot of it is about protein. So protein is sort of having its heyday. I don't think that there's evidence to show that the immediate post-exercise provision of protein is absolutely necessary. So we used to think that that was the case, definitely for carbohydrates. And people would talk about the post-exercise window and say, it's really only open for 30 minutes. You need to get your substrates in this time. And most research that's been done shows that for protein, that's definitely not the case. It's more important to get a daily protein intake that, as I said, comes close to 1.6, that you pace your protein in sort of as much as you can evenly across the day, because you have no means of storing protein. Unlike carbohydrates and fats, you can store them. But protein, you can't store it somewhere and then use it later. You have to use it when you've eaten it. So once you've exercised, your muscle then becomes sensitive to the effects of protein, probably for up to 48 hours. So anytime that you eat in that window, you're going to get an anabolic response. Now, a practical message to athletes is always to remember 3 R's. It works in English, I'm not so sure in Czech, but rehydrate, which is the first R. You got to get fluid back. Refuel, which for most high-end athletes means carbohydrate, and repair. So the repair or remodel part is protein. And so I say to athletes, you know, particularly those who are at the higher end and looking to really, you know, maximize their gains and are doing 2-a-day workouts on a high volume of training, that you need to focus on that post-exercise period. And it does make some sense to try and get something fluid with carbohydrates, with protein. The fat, you know, if you like it, if you can tolerate it, if you want to go low carb, that's your choice. But I think that there's a performance detriment that is associated with that for most high-end athletes.
So you just need carbs to perform the best you can. It looks like it, right?
I think every high-end sport, when you get into the, you know, whatever you want to call it, the critical performance zone, and you need to sprint or provide a maximal effort, that's driven by carbohydrate, for sure.
It's very interesting. You said you should spread your protein during the day. I understand that. How many meals of protein you would have optimally?
Yeah. So we think, and there's some research to sort of suggest that this is probably the case, that you can push 4 meals in a day and get the maximum response. I think you'll get it with 3. I think you're close if you do 2, although not as good. But if you only get it all in 1 meal, then that's not as good as spreading it over. Best to do 3 to 4. There's a group from the Netherlands, Luc van Loon's group at Maastricht University, that would advocate that one feeding be a pre-sleep feeding or a later day meal to offset overnight fasted losses of protein. And so if you're going to do breakfast, lunch, and then your dinner, and then a pre-sleep meal, that would be the advice.
Perfect, thank you. Do you know what do you consider the worst nutritional science myths in fitness industry?
Well, so related to protein, there are 2 that people talk about quite a bit. The first is that protein makes your blood acidic, and then the acid causes your bones to lose calcium, and so protein makes your bones more likely to fracture. And in fact, the exact opposite is true. So most people, I don't think, realize this, is that your bone is about 40 to 50% by composition protein. It's made up of collagen. So it's not just like, it's not chalk. It's not made just of calcium. If it was, your bones would break all the time, but they have a little bit of bend to them. Not a lot, but a little bit. And so once you have calcium dialed in and you have vitamin D dialed in, then the third bone supportive nutrient is actually protein. So people who have the adequate amount of calcium, adequate amount of vitamin D, if they consume protein and they perform exercise, even better, then they have very good bone mineral density. I think the second myth, that probably the biggest one that most people say, is the protein causes kidney failure. And that's not true. It's completely untrue. So the reason, and I think that the main genesis behind where this idea came from or comes from, and it still does, like it's about a 50 to 60-year-old hypothesis that was put out by a guy named Brenner And most people know that people who have chronic kidney disease or are, have kidney failure are put on low protein diets, because one of the main things the kidney has to filter is urea, which is the end product of protein metabolism. When you put those people on low protein diets, they live longer because you can preserve their kidney function. But that doesn't mean that the protein is what caused their kidney failure in the first place. So when we've conducted systematic reviews and meta-analysis, and we've looked for the evidence that protein, when you feed it at a high level versus a low level, would impair kidney function, there's no evidence of that. So, like the hypothesis is still out there, but it lacks human experimental data to show that it's true. So after 50 years or 60 years of saying this is, protein causes kidney failure, there still is no evidence to support that that's the case. So, even when you look and look really hard and search the literature, you can't find any evidence. Observational studies, the same thing. There are some findings that people go, what about this study? And I say, well, what about these 3 other studies where there was no relationship? And so we're sort of left with a situation where I think the hypothesis just lacks the evidence to prove that it's the case. And it's time for that one to, I don't know if you have a good Czech expression, but the English one is, it's time to put that one to bed.
Yeah, it's similar in Czech, but a bit differently. I know what you mean. Yeah, but it looks like you have a lot of practice in explaining these myths. I see.
Well, when you have a career when you talk about protein, and my own philosophy is that the recommended dietary allowance, the lowest level, is too low. People should eat more protein. Then as soon as you say that, people say, oh, what about your bones getting softer? What about your kidneys failing? And the more recent one is that people talk about consuming protein and the adverse impact it has on longevity and lifespan. And so they show in protein restricted animals that they live for longer, and calorically restricted animals, it's the same type of effect. And I won't disagree that the research in that area is powerful and quite convincing. The translation of it to humans, I think, is extremely difficult, because humans don't live in cages. They don't get fed at regular intervals. They're exposed to all kinds of environmental pathogens that those animals are not. And it's in a time of catabolism and crisis, metabolic crisis, when humans need to draw on protein reserves to fight that. So, I mean, COVID is a great example. It's an environmental pathogenic stress that causes people to need to mobilize protein. And so there's a lot of diseases that if you have low muscle and low protein reserve, you just don't do very well. And so I think that those are the times when people, as we age, really undergo accelerated aging. So a hospital stay, getting sick, having cancer, etc. Those people they're going downhill, but then they have a really sharp drop. And that's when you need a good protein reserve. So the experimental animals in cages that just sit around, they never have those things. Whereas humans, I think that those episodes in life are the true drop off and acceleration of aging, and the main reason why we die prematurely.
Makes sense. Very interesting. Thank you for that point. Dr. Phillips, do you think, is there a real difference between optimal protein intake for me as a natural, let's say, natural bodybuilder, or if I would be enchanced, steroids?
Yeah.
Because, all the bodybuilders have arguments like, the studies are done on natural lifters. And so it doesn't concern me. Which, is it right or is it right?
Okay.
Is it right? Is it not right? What do you think about it?
So I've listened to bodybuilders that are enhanced, and they say when you're enhanced, you need more protein. And I don't think that's true. And I'll tell you why. So we did some studies. So I was part of some studies that took place in Galveston, Texas with Bob Wolf, Arnie Ferrando, Kevin Tipton, and Randy Urban, where we gave older men who were hypogonadal testosterone to bring them up to normal ranges. So everything gets better. The big thing that testosterone does is it actually really increases the ability to reutilize amino acids that come from protein breakdown. Like, it greatly enhances that efficiency.
So you are more effective.
Yes. So if you think about it, here's body protein. It gets broken down to amino acids, and some of those amino acids get lost. However, most amino acids that go into this pool are actually recycled back into protein, and we're remarkably good at that. When you get testosterone, the amount of free amino acids that get recycled back into protein goes up a substantial amount, which actually means you're losing less. You can provide more protein from the diet, but it's not going to get you any greater muscle growth. And the calculations, you can easily do them back of the envelope and say, when was the period of your life, of everybody's life, it doesn't matter who you are, every human being, where you grew the most in your life?
When you're an infant.
Right. So when you're born and you go to, year 2, year 3, you triple your body weight, you triple your muscle mass, your skeleton grows, and the amount of protein required to sustain that growth is still only about maybe 1.6 to 1.7 grams per kilo, but you were little, so you didn't eat much. And no anabolically supported bodybuilder out there is growing at that rate. So it's a bit ridiculous to talk about, I need more because I'm growing faster, when actually this is the rate that you're growing compared to this is the rate you were growing when you were an infant. So you're right. The studies haven't been done on bodybuilders, but I can point you to the physiology that shows actually, if anything, your requirements for protein, not that they go down, but that the degree of optimization of the use of the anabolic steroid is enhanced to a very small degree by protein and more by the steroid and the lifting itself.
Great, thank you.
And I get it, as soon as I say that, big guys want to say, what the, but and all I would say is just show me the data. Show me the science, because I'll explain the physiology, and I think the physiology makes a little bit more sense when you think about the efficiency of recycling of amino acids versus the need for amino acids that limit growth. That doesn't happen in muscle growth in anybody. I don't think.
Thank you. I've heard that it is very hard to, let's say, recruit bodybuilders for scientific study because they don't want to do it a different way, if I heard correctly. So it is not an easy situation. If they want to prove it, they should accept it.
Some people have better luck recruiting them. I know Mike Roberts at Auburn, who's a friend and a collaborator. He has actually been able to get some pretty big guys into the gym. And every now and again, we get individuals that are sizable. And I can, so I've been at McMaster now for 23 years. And we've done, I think we've probably done about 15 or 16 training studies. And I can remember about, I would say, a half dozen individuals, women as well as men, who it was like they looked at a weight and they lifted it and you could watch them grow. Like it was incredible. And then when you talk to them, they say, oh, like my dad's a he's a farmer. You should see my brothers, you know, my mom's a big lady, you know, and so it just, you know, and even in those situations, the largest, I think, amount of growth that I've ever seen, we had one guy in a 16-week period. You know, we have blood and everything, and so we tested it for anabolic hormone levels and everything. In a 16-week period by DEXA, he gained 10 kilos of fat bone-free mass. So, you know, 22 pounds. And, you know, funnily enough, after the training, he just stopped training. And it disappeared. I could monitor him because he was actually a graduate student in our lab. So, but he was the biggest grower I've ever seen.
Very interesting.
They happen. They happen. They're genetic freaks. You know, they do happen.
How does the day of a scientist looks like?
Well,
I was always wondering.
It's a good question. It's changed over the time I've been at McMaster. When I was first at McMaster, I spent a lot more time in the lab helping my students. I was the person who took all the muscle biopsies. So I've probably taken, you know, 6,000 muscle biopsies over the time I've been doing research at McMaster. As time has gone on, I've spent less time in the lab. I still teach, not as much as I once did. I supervise a lot more graduate students. I spend a lot more time writing and editing my students' work. And I have to say this, people say, you know, wow, like you're so productive. And I say, you know, I stand on the shoulders of my graduate students and my research fellows. They're the ones that do the work. And I edit their work. So I'm a big editor these days. And I'm really, you know, blessed to be able to work with some very, very good people. I spend a lot more time sitting and talking with people about how they should do science, about how they should write, about how they might want to plan their careers than I did when I first started, because I was still trying to figure out how to do mine. But in the last year, I mean, this is not my university. This is the basement of my house. So I haven't even been at my university for about a year because of COVID. So, but I spend a good deal of time traveling and speaking and doing this sort of thing, which I really enjoy, communicating science to people, trying to make it understandable, trying to help people. You know, science is tough, right? But communicating it and making it easy to understand, you know, that's a really big passion for me. So I really enjoy that. But a day in my life now consists of me waking up and coming down to my basement
and working. Yeah. So you work from home,
yes.
right? You work from home.
I do. I work from home now. Yeah.
The same here. So what can you do today?
No, yeah, it's yeah. Hopefully sometime soon. And when we talked at the beginning 2 years ago, and a true love of mine is I've been able to travel and to see some really great places and meet some really great people, and that's the true essence of why I enjoy what people are it. Like, you know, I actually said 2 summers ago, I was in Prague for the first time in my life, and it was outstanding. It was just it was a great conference, the European Congress of Sports Science. It was a great city. We had a great time. I probably drank more beer than I have in a long time, but greatly enjoyed myself. And so things like that, you know, those life experiences they're things to be very grateful for. So I'm honored and blessed to be part of the science community and to have people help me do that sort of stuff.
Dr. Phillips, you sound so humble about this, but you are an inspiration for us all, you know, the trainers, the nutritionists. And I think the people you are saying, the graduate students, which you stand on their shoulders, like you said, I think you are the inspiration why they are on your school, because
it works both ways.
Yeah.
It works
I'm sure.
both ways. They inspire me, and hopefully
That's beautiful.
I inspire them a little bit. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I've heard. Is it true that Dr. Lane Norton studied at your university and you was his mentor? It is right.
No.
No.
But Lane did his PhD with Don Lehman, and Don is a good friend of mine. And so Don and I would often find ourselves speaking right next to each other on a program about protein. Don would talk about weight loss. I would talk about sport. Don would talk about old people, you know. And so there's not as many protein people as there are carbohydrate and fat people. But, you know, so Don Lehman, Bob Wolf, myself, Luke Van Loon, Phil Atherton, a few others. We see each other all the time. Doug Patton-Jones, Blake Rasmussen. Anyway, so I'm speaking with Don, and he's presenting all these data from this graduate student that he's got, Norton. And I'm like, who is this Norton guy? He goes, oh, you'd like him. He's a big guy. He's a bodybuilder. He lifts. And I said, yeah, this work is great. You know, it's awesome. And a lot of Lane's work, maybe all of Lane's work, was done in rodents, in rats. And so I said, well, you know, Lane needs to come to my lab to do a postdoc to learn how to do all this stuff in humans. So I emailed him. I tried to get him to come to my lab, and he goes, no, I'm gonna do this. I'm kind of gonna go on my own, try and make a name for myself. And I thought, you know, how's that gonna work? Like, what do you mean make a name for yourself? You gotta do some science, make a name for yourself. But this was early. And before social media sort of exploded. I mean, it was still there, but he did his bodybuilding, and then he did his powerlifting, and then this profile on Facebook initially, and then a little bit on Twitter, and now on Instagram. And, you know, now I'm glad to say that I know Lane.
But he mentions you a lot as he's some kind of mentor, or, you know, the protein master.
I keep saying to him that he could have come into my lab, and we might have been able to turn him into a scientist for life. But I think that Lane's found his own path, and he's doing really well. The piece that Lane brings that gives me a really special place is Lane says all the things in very Lane-like fashion.
Yeah, that's what I love.
I wish I could say that as a university professor, I can't.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe that's what he meant. He may have to make his own way.
Yeah, so it's a pleasure to say that I know Lane, but I greatly respect the man. He's humble. He calls it like he sees it. I got a lot of time for Lane. He's a good guy.
Thank you. And do you work out now? I mean, in these times, not today.
I do, but I obviously, so my gym is right behind me down here. It's sufficient weight, and I have a bike for me to be able to do what I want to do, but not the same routine as I had before. So I've been able to keep myself in pretty good shape. I don't think I'm as strong as I was before, but you adapt, you improvise. You've done a lot. I do a lot of body weight work, much more than I ever did before. But the gym where I go is closed, and it was open, and it was closed, and you know, so I was like off again.
The same
so
here.
I work at home.
Yeah. You know, I have a saying now that I say to my clients that if you have a home gym, you have more than if you have a Ferrari these times, because you're a bigger boss. Did your training? Well, you said it already, but how did your training change from, let's say you were 20, 30 years old and now, and why? You know, I want to just show that you can work out even when you're older. Many of my clients, you know, are 50 years plus and they are still working out.
Yeah.
And that's great.
So you know, as a young man, I was a team sport athlete. So rugby probably first, ice hockey second, football, like with the helmet football, but I played soccer too. Anything like that, that was always team sports. So when I worked out, it was to work out to be fitter, stronger, faster, for a team sport. When I worked out when I was younger, I probably, like for an average workout, it took me 2.5 hours, mainly because I talked. You know, you talk to your training partner, you sit down, you talk. Now, we didn't have phones to check, so it was a lot of chatter. And then every now and again, there would be a young lady would come in the gym and we would talk to them. So, yeah. You get a little bit older. When I stopped playing rugby, probably in my mid to late 30s, because my things were broken. I was getting too broken playing. I still play a little bit of ice hockey. It's not contact or anything. It's slow. It's not very good to watch, but it's fun. I had a transition period when I stopped playing team sports that was difficult for me to figure out how working out now became what I did for sport. I would say 2 to 3 years where I really struggled to motivate myself to not spend enormous amounts of time in the gym, to cut it back and train as much as I wanted to, which was usually 5 to 6 days a week. Then you get kids and a wife and a mortgage, and time becomes a premium. And I always say to people, my most valuable commodity these days is time. And so I try and protect it as much as I can. I'm a morning person. I wake up usually without an alarm clock around 4:35 in the morning. That's just who I am. And first thing I do is a cup of coffee. And then I work out. And it's a lot more probably lower loads than it was when I was younger. It's done in an hour. If I spend more than an hour, to me, I've spent too much time. Every now and again, when I was in the gym and I find myself next to a younger man, I see this person lift weights and I'm like, I think I can do that. And this competitive instinct in me says, yeah, I can do that. No problem. And the thing that hurts the next day are my joints. So my shoulders, my elbows, my knees, my hips. So I try to avoid that because that sets my training back and I can't do what I want to do. But I'm still a team sport athlete in the way I train. So I still try and keep my fitness pretty high. I still try and keep my strength up. So I can run, 5 kilometers in 20 minutes. Perfect. And I can still, I think, I could still bench press, I want to say about 1.5 times my own body weight, but I might be pushing that.
That's great. This is a good example for my clients. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no, but it's more motivated now. Like people say, what are you working out for now? And I have 3 boys, and the oldest is 21, the youngest is 16, and I'm working to keep up with them, right? So when I get them in tight, it's, dad's strength can win, but if there's speed involved, they're faster than me. They're too fast. They can outrun me. They can outskate me. In the clinch, I could probably get them, but that's about it.
So it's good still.
Yeah. So I'm working out to keep up with them, and then hopefully at some point to keep up with their kids, so my grandkids, and the event horizon is being in your 70s, 80s, 90s, and beyond, and still being able to do the things that you do. And that's more recently been a much bigger focus of the research that I've done.
That's great. Is there any interesting scientific research that you work on right now?
Yeah, there's some stuff you've got going right now that I think is pretty interesting, around as much to do with the genetic mechanisms that underpin muscle hypertrophy. So we've made some strides in that area, and I have a grad student who's got a paper that we're just finishing writing up, looking at it. Again, it's a high load, low load comparison, which is, you know, I know a lot of people get really twisted and upset when I say it doesn't really matter what you lift as long as you lift to close to fatigue or high effort. But it's interesting to me that we'll show in this paper this issue of being a responder. So these people who I told you about, this guy that does this, people have sort of said, well, are they really a responder? So if you train them again, would they respond? And over the years, we actually have had people who have done training studies as students when they were in their first year of university, and then done another training study in their fourth year. We've only had about 4 or 5, but their response was the same. And so I think that's, you know, that's a little bit of evidence to suggest that it's there. So without giving the whole show away, we'll show that this is the same phenomenon within an individual. I'll just leave it at that. So it's, I think it's pretty cool data. So hopefully we'll get that out. And we've got a lot of data waiting in older individuals as well, which is, you know, that's a real focus of the research that we're doing right now. Only because I think, you know, to your clients, like being fit, being strong, that's like a brand mark for, say, people who are going to age well.
Yeah, I think the same thing. It's very interesting, the research on strength versus hypertrophy and weights, you know, that you don't have to have as high a load as we thought for strength gains. I think Mr. Sheffield shared something like this in last weeks. It's very exciting. I'm very curious about this research. So we are. Is there, Mr. Phillips? I really thank you for your time. I really appreciate your time. Is there anything you would like to mention? So let's say some tip for everyone, or anything. What do you think anyone should hear from you?
So I use this quote all the time, and it's not mine, but I think it epitomizes really when we're talking about successful aging well. And I know people in their 20s, they have no concept of aging. You know, it's only about tomorrow or next week, or, you know. And then in your 30s, maybe you get married or something, and you begin to think about it. Sometime you hit 40, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay. And then when you turn 50, and that for me that's a few years back now. You really do begin to get a sense of, okay, I'm in the latter part of my life. How do I want to live? And I heard a great expression from a guy that I was giving a talk about forming a vision of your future you. What is it you would like to be? Who would you like to be? And how would you like to be as you get older? So Jack LaLanne was, he wore a tight spandex jumpsuit and was doing fitness videos and feats of strength in the 50s and 60s on American television, before it was even, you know, nobody knew about fitness. And he had a great quote that he said, you know, exercise is king and nutrition is queen. Put them together and you have a kingdom. And I think it perfectly summarizes at least 2 of what I think are the key features of aging well. So first, you can't do it without exercise. People want to talk about nutrition. And yes, it's important. But without exercise, it doesn't mean anything. 2 of them together, it's a kingdom. There's a third one. And I think maybe now people are saying there's a 4th one. So I'll just put the 3rd one in, is that you have to have a good set of friends, a good social network, people that support you, care about you, and are going to take care of you. And then everybody, and I said, and I think that's it. And lately people have been saying, oh, well, what about sleep? And I said, you know what? The more I read about getting sufficient sleep, you're probably right. It has to be in there somewhere. So I'm trying to force sleep in there as well, although I don't know enough about sleep to say, but I'm not a great sleeper myself. But I do know enough to say that if you don't get enough of it, you don't feel good, things don't work right, and etc. So, but to me, you know, exercise and nutrition sit on the top of the pyramid, and try and figure out that vision of your future you, where you would like to be, how you would like to be, and a lot of things fall in place.
Perfect. Really, thank you. This is a great finish of our podcast. Again, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate that. And just have a nice day. I hope your work goes well and your future self will be the one you are focusing on and you want to be.
Thank you, Martin. It's been a real pleasure and an honor always to communicate with people. You know, we're 6,000 kilometers apart, and Zoom has made this a reality. So it's an honor and a pleasure for me to meet you, and I hope your subscribers and your clients enjoy some of this. So
I believe they will. Thank you very much, and have a nice day, Mr. Phillips.
Yeah, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.